Rajarshi? So, good afternoon, everyone. This is the last working session for today, European Union's responses to refugee crisis. I would now like to request Dr. Amrish Dhaka, Associate Professor at the Center for Inner Asian Studies in the School of International Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University to chair the session. Sir, over to you.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Very good evening to you all. I thank Baswati and the Center for European Studies to invite me for this kind of interaction. The pandemic has taken a quite a good toll in our academic agility, and sometimes we may be needing more active engagement. And I see this as an opportunity to interact with the students on many issues. Usually the absence of teaching, you can say online teaching itself has a very mundane kind of now business these days, and we really miss these kind of interactions. So maybe today it's a good opportunity. Uh, Today, we in this session have three participants, and the session is themed on European Union's response to refugee crisis. Although I must first of all confess that both the areas of European Union and the refugee crisis are a learning zone for me, because I'm basically a political geographer. But definitely, with your interaction, I will be gaining much more, you can say, benefit from this. So the students are invited for the presentation with the following set of norms. I think I am being told that 10 minutes is given per student. So each student is having 10 minutes. And then perhaps after all the three papers are being read, then we can have Q&As. Those who students are there, they can interact, and also the participants themselves can re-engage each other. I will encourage this. Although the domain is not fixed to any particular geographical area, but I see one paper on Afghanistan. Perhaps that is the reason that has gone. You can say I am being here. And then the another is on theoretical mold also. So that is also important, how peace building can be theorized. So let's just begin. I invite the first participant in the stated order. Rajarshi Chakraborty, research scholar, CIAS, JNU, is going to speak on a critical analysis of the EU's response to the Afghan refugee crisis. The floor is yours now.
Rajarshi, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, am I audible now? Okay. Thank you, Devanjali. Thank you, sir. My topic is a critical analysis of the EU response to the Afghan refugee crisis. Afghanistan is one of the largest source of country of migration in the whole world. But recently, it was taken over by the Syrian refugee crisis, and now the Syrian refugee crisis is the #1 refugee crisis in Europe. The Afghan refugee crisis is a multidimensional issue. It can't just be a humanitarian challenge, or it can just be a development challenge, or it can't be seen as a security issue. It has to be seen multidimensionally. Most of the Afghan refugees live in the two neighboring states, namely Iran and Pakistan. But after 2007, the Iranian government stopped providing the proof of registration card to the Afghan citizens living in Iran. And in 2014, after the violent army school attack in Peshawar, the Pakistan government had to introduce a new security policy and that security policy had a huge implication, a huge impact on the Afghan refugees staying in Pakistan, because the Pakistan government believed that the whole attack, the Peshawar attack, had some Afghan connection. The government of Afghanistan has a very complex relationship with these two neighboring states, Iran and Pakistan. It's not like in 70s or 90s, whenever such kind of internal disputes happen or something like that, the people of Afghanistan used to travel to Iran and Pakistan because of the similarity in religious issues, that their ethnic similarities, and the porous borders. But right now, since last 10 years, the Afghans are not being to travel to these two neighboring states freely. And in recent times, since 2010 and 11, a large number of Afghan refugees started going to the distant lands in European countries, mainly in Germany, in Australia, in Denmark, and in Sweden. And previously, in 2011 and 12, when the Angela Merkel government in Germany, she introduced the open door policy, a large number of Afghans were welcome in their country. But after a few years, due to some violent attacks on the German residents, the Merkel government had to cancel their open door policy, and after that, the German government deported many Afghans to the Afghanistan. After that, in 2016, the European Union and Afghanistan signed a joint way forward. And in that agreement, the European Union considered Afghanistan as a safe country, and arranged the deportation of Afghans to the Afghanistan with some help of financial helps and food helps. But in that joint way forward, the Afghan government has had very little choice but to accept the agreement. And some experts believe that the European government used the leverage of foreign aid to Afghanistan to pressurize the Afghan government, because during the war on terror, the European Union was the fifth largest donor to the country, to Afghanistan. And according to the joint way forward, there is no division between the Afghans used to stay in European countries. But in reality, those Afghans, they all have their different needs, their different demands, and European Union did nothing to integrate those Afghans into the Afghan society. And another thing, that European Union considered Afghanistan as a secure country, but if we look at the UN report or the SIGA report, it says that Afghanistan still is a volatile country in security issues. And since 2014, the death of civilian people due to Taliban attack, or due to other kind of attacks by the ISIS have been increased. And another thing, the European Union also considered Afghanistan as safe for the economic possibilities. But in reality, during the war on terror, the GDP of Afghanistan increased, not because of the agricultural or any other indigenous Afghan economic capabilities, but for the service sectors that were service sectors that are present in the country. And since 2014, in the country, the Taliban had spread their presence all over the country. Right now, more than 67% of Afghan provinces or Afghan areas are controlled by the Taliban leaders, and from some provinces, the Taliban are collecting taxes, and by collecting taxes, the Taliban are trying to prove their legitimacy in those provinces. And last year, we all know about the COVID-19 situation in the whole world, and the situation has worsened the refugee scenario, the reintegration scenario in the country. And the European Union, the European Union and Afghan signed the joint way forward in 2016, and the agreement was expired in October 2020. After that, the European Union tried to introduce a new refugee and migrants policy. But again, those policies are morely focused on the returnees issue rather than reintegrating those refugees in the European countries. And in the refugee integration scenario, we cannot only blame the European Union, but the political fragmentation in the country in Afghanistan is also to be blamed because uh, in Afghanistan they don't have a centralized government. Of course, in paper they have centralized government, but if you see in the local level, people, the Afghan citizens, they have their allegiances towards the land warlords, or the landlords, towards the Taliban. And right now, when the intra-Afghan peace deal is being discussed, the refugee integration is not at all in the priority list of the Afghan government. And the joint way forward was signed between the European Union and the previous the centralized elected Afghan government. But if the Taliban government they come to power, and it's likely to be in the scenario in recent future, they'll unlikely to follow what their predecessors have done with the European Union. Uh, uh, in conclusion, we can say that like experts say that if European Union doesn't want any kind of Afghan refugees to integrate in their country, they should solve or try to solve the refugee issue in Afghanistan, in Afghan soil as Afghanistan. Like they should engage themselves. The experts believe that the European Union should include themselves in the local community to find the root cause of the displacement of the Afghan refugees, so that the Afghan refugees don't go to European countries and don't hamper the peace and stability in those countries. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Rajeshri. You have brought the salient aspects of European Union's approach to the Afghan crisis. Although the perenniality of the crisis is so long that I would recommend that you can look into the very specific phases of migration from Afghanistan to European countries, because now there are actually generational, you can say, gaps. I mean, Afghans you will find, you can say, heptagenarian migrants in European countries, and now the young Afghans meeting those. They are, so there is, you can see, I mean, there are waves of migration where old Afghans are meeting young Afghans in European cities, and there is a very different kind of reaction, because the ideas and circumstances in which one generation moved to Europe and now the current generation which is moving are fairly different. And I believe that the expectations are also quite different. Although this is very important, as you mentioned, that the ethnic part is quite strong in Afghanistan, and there is that sentiment is also played in the when the diaspora, or you can say in the Afghan people meet outside. But then their integration within the European society is more important than the ethnic differences, and I think on that account Afghans have fairly accepted what are the standards, what are the requirements, and the kind of religious zeal which is in Afghanistan seen as a part of the political articulation of the Afghan identity. Afghans are really not keen in upholding that kind of identity, because something which is in Middle East quite strong. So Afghans are fairly moderate and open-minded when they accept the new climate there. and I believe that they are quite successful there. So thank you for the presentation. I now invite next participant. This is Purnima Sharma, if I'm not wrong, please. And yes, she is research scholar for Center for European Studies, and this is European Union's response to 2015 refugee crisis through integrated peace building approach. So floor is yours, Purnima.
Thank you, sir. Hello, everyone. And today, my topic, it will cover actually looking into the security role of the EU and how the crisis, especially in the pre and post Lisbon reforms period, helped EU to grow as a security actor at a global scale. So with the creation of the EU, we see a regional economic organization transformed into a political entity, but with an ambition of evolving into a global security actor. And in this regard, common foreign and security policy had also been established at the treaty. And additionally, the insecurities in the post-Cold War period provided perfect platform for the EU to initiate its peace-building missions. However, due to lack of experiences on the field, initially EU had to launch its first peace-building mission under the UN umbrella in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which brought mixed results. Later, EU wanted to try its military potential by deploying military personnel in Kosovo war under NATO flag. So, however, based on its experiences on the field and also based on the guidelines provided by the UN at an agenda for peace that was adopted in 1992, followed by the supplement to an agenda in 95, but especially based on the Brahimi report, which was established in 2000, that focused on the specific components of peace building. EU established its own peace building policy in 1999. With the establishment of European Security and Defense Policy, which was later came to be known as Common Security and Defense Policy. So I will use CSDP. It included civilian and military missions and operations. So it increased it provided the capability to the EU to launch its independent CSDP missions worldwide. Even in the most insecure or most challenging conflict zones, such as in Congo, Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia. And since 2003, EU has launched 34 CSDP missions worldwide, out of which 22 were civilian in nature. It means EU were focusing on civilian missions more. However, in order to implement, for the proper implementation of its CSDP peace building missions, EU adopted a comprehensive approach to peace building in the pre-Lisbon reforms period. So its comprehensive approach was also known as the blueprint of the NATO's comprehensive approach, because it emphasized on the coordination cooperation between civilian and military aspects of crisis management. However, EU also added one more component to it, which is the coordination and cooperation between EU and its member states and with other international actors and local actors involved in the conflict. In 2007, EU came up with the implementation report of its comprehensive peace building missions, which focused on which highlighted the major challenges that EU faced at the operational level, such as the lack of coordination and cooperation between its military and civilian aspects, and a weak coordination between the EU and member states or with other international actors for information sharing, and also the lack of understanding of the local culture, peace building in their historical and cultural context. And major components of peace buildings were missing. For example, the bottom-up approach and the national ownership component. All these reasons led to the problems that existed at the institutional level. These reasons paved the way for the major institutional reforms at the Treaty of Lisbon in 2009 that pushed the EU to broaden up its comprehensive approach. Thus, in 2013, EU adopted comprehensive approach to its external conflicts and crises by added various features to it. For example, now preparing country or regional strategy papers, interlinking internal and external aspects of security, and focusing on security and development nexus, So all these aspects increase the capability again of the EU to include other important components of to build a long-term peace building, and in order to avoid the region relapse into the conflict. However, in the post-Lisbon reforms period, EU faced new and complex types of security challenges in the form of refugee crisis, which severely impacted the political, economic, and social sectors of the EU. It also created a vast gap between the EU and its member states. It was also due to the reason because of the EU's weak and late response to the civilian crisis that was going on for so long in its immediate neighborhood in Tunisia, in the form of Arab uprising in the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa. No doubt other important actors were present, for example, US and Russia, but here comes the importance of soft power. EU's role as a mediator was very important, that could prevent the escalation of civil war into a continental crisis. It further highlighted a major problem that was existed at the institutional level. That was the presence of the realistic approach or behavior that was existed in the liberal institution, because all of the decision-making powers were in the hands of member states, and they took independent stance and harsh stance to manage the flow of illegal refugees. It was also their realistic approach was also visible even in the pre-Lisbon reforms period in case of Iraq and Afghanistan, where member states were divided on the for deploying their troops, and they deployed their troops more to the NATO's military missions rather than use EUPOL civilian mission. So against it really downgraded the image of the liberal EU and created a capability expectations gap. Thus, against this backdrop, EU adopted a global strategy because of realization that external insecurity is directly linked to the internal security of the EU, and it's a refugee crisis. It's not confined to one region. It has global impacts. It needs global solution. This global strategy emphasized on the integrated approach of peace building. Thus, in 2017, EU adopted integrated approach to external conflicts and crises that provided 4 layers of action, like multi-level. Now, EU is able to act at any level: local, national, regional, international, and it is a multi-phase. Now, EU is able to act at any phase of conflict cycle, started from conflict prevention to the post-conflict recovery to long-term peace building or reconstruction missions. And then it is a multi-dimensional. Now, EU is able to include or utilize all the instruments it has at its disposal beyond civilian CSDP missions. And finally, it has multilateral approach. Now EU can bring all the actors at all levels together. Thus, the most important, additionally, the integrated approach focused on the civilian aspects of crisis management in order to meet the sustainable development goal of goal number 16, which aims to preserve a peaceful, just and inclusive society. So EU focused on the multilateral approach in response to not only manage the crisis, but dealing with the root causes of the conflict in the country of origin of conflict. Thus, it has increased the capability of the EU to act in a rapid and effective manner in the most conflict or challenging conflict zones by utilizing all the instruments it has at its disposal, by adding special other components of peace building, for example, early response, early warning to early response, security sector reforms. And additionally, EU also signed bilateral strategic partnerships with for example, Turkey. It involved important regional actors to prevent the crisis, to manage the flows. It dealt with the Lebanon and also worked in close cooperation with the African Union to control or to combat the illegal trafficking of the arms and people. Thus, we say that the EU's ambition of becoming a global security actor has made it go through several challenges. However, in reciprocity, it helped the EU to grow as a security actor and play its role in an influential manner. EU started its first civilian mission, integrated mission in Iraq by providing it's an assistant mission, border assistant mission, advisory missions. Thus, I would like to here provide 3 recommendations, which is very important for the EU to continue exerting its influence at the global scale. First, the important point is there should be strong participation of the local stakeholders and civil society groups in order to prevent the clash of civilization and understand the problems in their historical and cultural context to build sustainable peace. Second most important is the interlinking of top-down and bottom-up approach that taken into account while making policies and implementing it on the ground. And finally, security and development issues should be looked upon together. Thus, EU should change or mandate its policies and approaches according to the time and need demand of the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Purnima. You have brought quite a sizable number of cases for European Union's approach to peace building and how they have utilized the opportunity of crisis of refugee management that often has plagued. But let me contextualize it in the case of, say, 2 countries, for, say, example, Afghanistan and Syria. And they have quite a number of refugees in Europe, both from these 2 regions. And we find that it is not the EU, but the NATO, which actually handles most of these policy operatives. So the military component of EU becomes dominant when there are, you can say, hotspots and migration from the, or you can say refugee migration from the hotspots takes place. So how that military discourse or military arm works in such situations, that is something you can also focus upon. We see an example because if you look into the case of Afghanistan, then they had what you call the reconstruction teams, provincial reconstruction. These PRTs were basically military civilian engagements, and they were modeled on the same idea of handling the crisis, because they were, although they were in Afghanistan's case, they came across the internally displaced people. But yes, the motive was also to bring back the diaspora from European countries to help these PRTs. And a lot of Polish, at least I'm aware of the Poland, that Afghans from Poland, quite a number of them helped to the Polish PRT who were operating in Bamyan and Daikondi and the other areas. So European Union has this policy, but its framework is quite big, and the multiple stakeholders manage it. But at the same time, the European Union does not liquidate its political idea. And the way in Syria, the military arm has operated, I mean, gone overboard, and the use of you can say peace operatives such as white helmets, and how these people have actually operated in those conflict zones, that becomes somewhere question on the credibility of the European Union's approach of handling these things. So we can have that kind of critical narrative also. I invite the next participant, Arnab Datta, research scholar, Center for European Studies, JNU, and his topic is EU migration management in Afghanistan, the pall of the COVID-19 pandemic. So you are speaking on a very contemporary, relevant topic. The floor is yours, Arnab.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, Professor Thapa. A very good afternoon to Professor Rashpati Sarkar, all my dear participants, and all my dear seniors in my center and from all over the SIS. So I hope I'm audible. So as Sir has already told about the topic, I will be dealing particularly with the research questions that are posed in my article. The first one is about the composite nature of the EU policy towards Afghanistan in the recent years that will from 2020, that's last year. And then I will go on to discuss about the particular challenges that are being faced by the European Union as an international organization to tackle the situation, not only the stable refugees there in their own countries, but also people in Afghanistan who are in the Senate. So some of these was already touched by the first of the last speakers, Rajesh Chakraborty. So the joint way forward, as he has already mentioned, it's the first and very important document that canvassed the
Arnav, 1 minute, hold on. Arnav, you're not very clearly audible. Can you just check your connection once? Because we don't really can't make out what you're saying.
Hello, am I audible now?
Yes,
But
I'm
your
not
voice
able to
is
follow you.
breaking.
If you
We are
can-
not
I
able to
think-
follow you.
I think just check, maybe it's connected from two devices. Maybe you're logged into two devices. That could be also the problem.
Hello.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. So as I was telling, the joint way forward is the first document that came in 2016 that charted the relationship between the European Union, the member states of the European Union, with that of the Afghan refugees. And particularly in that, the two aspects of migration management, that is repatriation and that of deportation, has been talked about. Now, secondly, we find next year in 2017, the European Asylum Support Office, they came out with a particular communication named the Country Guidance Report, which is to make a kind of an unanimous stance among the EU member states how to tackle the inflow of the Afghan refugees in the different EU member states like Denmark, like that of Portugal, Italy, Greece, Sweden, Netherlands, and Germany. Now, these are all based upon the 2008 document of the Return Directives, which has total 27 clauses and 13 sub-clauses based on the rule of law and rights, economic.
I'm afraid we have lost connection. Is it so?
Yes, I think we have lost connect. Acha,
See, if we can speak without the headphone, because the poor quality of the jack is the one which is creating problem. That is an echo. So if you can ask him that if he can speak without the headphone jack.
Arnav, are you able to hear me?
Yeah, hello.
Can you speak without your earphones?
It is audible to you all.
No.
If I speak without the headphone.
The jack is the problem. It is actually corroded one, so that is why it is echoing.
Hello. Am I audible now?
Yes, yes.
Don't use your headphones, please. Can you speak without your headphones?
I'll try now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You can remove that jack from that.
Oh,
Just remove
am I
your-
audible?
Yeah,
Have you
much
removed
better.
the connection? Have you removed the jack of your
Yeah, remove
headphone? Not connected, right?
Can you all hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
Hello.
Just remove the pin from the laptop or whatever device you're using.
No, sir. I'm just using my mobile. I'm not using any
Yeah,
other
then it's fine.
device.
Yes. Go with the mobile microphone. Go with the mobile microphone.
I'm just speaking through my mobile.
Go ahead. It's better.
So as I was telling, so this is a second country guidance report that was made by EASO in 2017 based on these criteria, because there was a huge number of Afghans, those who are coming into the different European countries. So deportation and with that repatriation was going on a large scale, and following that, we find that in 2018, the next year, comes another communication from that of the European Commission on that of the.
Arnav, try switching off your video. Sorry, Arnav, try switching off your video. Yeah.
Is it audible now? Hello.
Yes, you're audible.
Yeah, please carry on.
So as I was telling on now this program that was being made on 2018 by the European Commission, it is about the qualified Afghans and connecting to the diaspora. It means that particularly Germany, Italy, Portugal, and Sweden, they were trying to voluntarily or involuntarily send back some of the Afghans who have got education in their country, and then they could go back and support the reintegration program for the other Afghan people who are also moving out. But amidst all these programs and all these communications, we find that suddenly this COVID-19 erupts in 2019. So already from the month of December, there were certain reports that were being seen, and then acting on behalf of those reports, we find that the European Union immediately comes up in January with a stopgap communication, and that was being named as the temporary restriction on the non-essential travel to the European Union countries. Now, this particular document was reverberated and it was rather ramified in 2020 in the month of March, specifically on 16th March. Another report came on that topped this particular report, whereby all the people, the refugees of Afghanistan, those who are staying in European countries, they were stopped from being sent back to their own country, that is deportation stopped, as also the program of repatriation. And then European Union was now focusing on how to contain the spread of the virus in these camps, because refugees mostly lived in the camp, and these camps were not at all in the hygienic condition. So we find that up to March 2020, these were the composite nature of the European Union policies, which were at variance with the Citizenship Charter Act that was being passed by the Provisional Government of Afghanistan way back in 2011, and then it was later on revised to a certain extent when Ghani came in the year 2015. But those charters those points that were being made about reintegration are not quietly followed by the European Union, because they laid heavily on the importance of democracy building in Afghanistan, which to some extent was very much difficult given the clannish culture of the Afghan people. So what we find later on is that on top of this new disease, it was spreading rapidly. Herat, Mazar-e-Sharif, Kandahar, already by June 2020, some 2,447 cases were being detected. And the Afghan people, the refugees or the asylum seekers went to the different countries, like in Germany, 171. In Sweden, we have 167 cases, and in Italy and Portugal combined, we have 327 cases of Afghan people who were getting affected. So there was a complete rush in the European Union about coming up with programs to contain these people, the flow of the people, both inside this country and those who want to go outside from those countries. And on that basis, we find that in 2020, in the month of July, comes another very, very important decision from the European Union that is called the country guidance report, and this country guidance report is now magnifying the role of the humanitarian aid specifically based on the health system. So we find that European Union humanitarian aid flight was being discharged to Afghanistan, and in July, that is specifically 17th of July 2020, some 28 million words of life-saving drugs were being sent to Afghanistan. And parallelly, the EU countries, they were also taking steps for sanitization of the refugee camps and for the widespread containment of the diseases by maintaining some kind of hygienic and self-sufficiency in the production of the programs that will lead to some kind of social distancing among the refugees. Now, this was adopted in August 2020 with another infusion of 39 million euros for the another aid program that European Union actually injected in Afghanistan. So totally we find that by the end of 2020, some 4 lakh people in Afghanistan were brought under some kind of relief due to the initiatives that were taken by the European Union. So challenges remain even as I speak here today. We find that the second wave has already affected. Mostly, we find that the western part of Afghanistan and the northern part of Afghanistan still today only I checked some more than 3,000 cases has been detected. But thankfully, if I could conclude, because there is no conclusion to this particular talk, this some kind of arrangements were being made, medicines were being given, vaccination has started, but it's a very pitiful condition in Afghanistan. But somewhat the Afghan people, the diaspora or the refugees who are living in the different European Union countries, they were having some kind of a relief, a better exposure to the health system due to the various initiatives that were being taken by the European Union as an international organization and individually by these EU member states. So the only two things that could be said to be effective or it can work that was being planned out is that the people should themselves behave in a hygienic manner, and the camps and other areas which were refugee areas in these European Union countries, they should be practicing some kind of hygienic habits, and they are already given vaccination. Many of them are given, not all. But then the effectiveness is under question because we do not know how far it will be effective. And then the coronavirus is going on in its different mutant forms. So by and large, 2021, it inaugurates a kind of a very difficult situation which is being tackled to some extent, but much of the work still remains, as we also don't know what other kind of attack this virus can actually have on the humanity as a whole. So with these words, I would like to end my discussion on this very topic. Thank you everyone for your patient ears. Thank you.
Thank you, Arnav, for your presentation. Although we had some glitches, but finally you have made it, and I congratulate for you. No doubt, the pandemic has put into disarray many of these schemes and programs where the extraordinary effort is required, such as Afghanistan. So definitely things are there, but also there are on multiple fronts. The challenges are there. You know, the crisis has multiple orders. So during the pandemic, we also saw that there was kind of a Islamophobic tendencies getting exacerbated, perhaps maybe some due to pandemic also and due to some other causes. And that contributed also some kind of problem. We had some, you can say, stabbings and attacks in European cities. And we find that as a result, the kind of a trust deficit that, because unless you have the popular people support for the policies, then the migration and especially the refugee management becomes difficult, because governments themselves cannot do everything and you need popular support for your policies. So I thank you and I congratulate you. Now the floor is open for Q&As. Those who want to, they can just raise the hand, and I request the coordinator to take over the situation, because I'm not aware, I mean, who is going to be, there are people, just tell them to ask the questions and identify the presenter to whom they want to ask.
Sir, I think there's a question in the chat box for Rajoshi, and I will read it out. What were and are the key challenges of Afghan refugees from the collapse of the then Dr. Najibullah regime until now? And also, how do you distinguish between Afghan refugees and migrants? If there are any more questions, you can raise your hand and unmute yourself, or you can type it in the chat box. Purnama, unmute yourself.
I have question from Rajeshi. Actually, you said that there are 67% of area in the control of Taliban in Afghanistan. So I would like to know the source, because this information is totally incorrect. Because in Afghanistan, major part, it is Taliban control area is less than 30% in Afghanistan. And the data they are showing, it is almost prepared by the Western media. And they always, because Afghanistan is majorly a barren land, actually, it's a dry area, land area, and it's mountain region. No one, main population is not living there. So they are always counting that area for the percentage when they are saying it is under the Taliban control, and it is not actually the case. And second, you said like the food security. I'm not the expert on this, but so far, whatever I have read, food security is taken. You said there is a very big problem and government is not able to tackle that issue. But that's why, because Afghanistan is still dependent on humanitarian assistance program, and it is majorly taken care of by the UNDP program in Afghanistan, and majorly by India itself. Every second day, foods and they are providing lots of wheat and rice and highly nutrition biscuits from India to Afghanistan. And most of the food they are getting, the wheat and rice, they are getting from the Central Asian countries. So just I would like to add.
Okay.
Are there any more questions?
Maybe I can add a little bit to what the question in the chat box was there, because from the period of Najibullah, if you'd like to draw an kind of a ontology of migration from Afghanistan, see, the point here is that there was situation in times when the Afghanistan was largely oriented towards the kind of a republican experiment from the period of Dawood. So there was an elite middle class in Afghanistan which was emerging since those times, and perhaps the 1992, the fallout of Najibullah government and coming of the Taliban and not Taliban at the time, Mujahideen, basically the 7 parties from Peshawar. The reaction was that the middle class and you can say the republican mindset of the elite, that immediately took off from the country, and there was a movement. People, in fact, Najibullah's family, she came to, I mean, the woman, lady, and their 2 daughters, they came to Delhi. And by that account, if you look into the present circumstances, there is a willingness, and in fact, last 20 years, most of the Afghans, at least the educated well and the civilian with the mindset, the relatively less oriented towards the dogma of religion, those have gone there. But there is a kind of a doubt that if the current peace process does not adequately handle that kind of challenge, then maybe again there is a second kind of a movement from Afghanistan would take place, where the intellectuals, the academicians, because in fact the journalists, the way the journalists are being killed in last couple of months, and they are basically the nerve of Afghanistan, because a lot of movement that has been given by the current political process, the media and the young journalists that have taken the really cudgels of how to handle the Afghan peace process in their, you can say, subaltern manner. So those young people may actually find difficulty if the international community does not address those concerns, and there can be a migration again of that, you can say the intellectual capital, and that is something which is not, I mean, in favor or in good for Afghanistan. So maybe because Najibullah symbolized in many ways the republican spirit of Afghanistan, and the current Ghani government also tries to maintain that posture. How successfully they are able to maintain in Afghanistan, perhaps that only. Although the guarantors of international peace, such as China and Russia and America, they have said that they don't want Taliban emirate back. But let us see how things turn out in the, because ground realities are quite different. Oh, so thank you, and please, I mean, over to the organizers. I thank you for this, providing me this opportunity, and it's been a very engaging session. And I also congratulate the young speakers, and I wish them well. So thank you. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you to all the participants for their
to sort of respond to the question also. So if you
Yeah.
can just take it forward.
Yeah. Hello, am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, yes, you are.
I think the first question, the challenges to the Afghan refugees since Najibullah government to now. I think Dhaka sir has already answered your question. And the next question was difference between the Afghan refugees and Afghan migrants. Okay, I differentiate between them like the people, the Afghans who are leaving the country due to security reasons. I am considering them as Afghan refugees. But migrants are those like when I talk about migrants, I talk about the economic migrants. That means they have some kind of sometimes some kind of skills, some kind of vocational training, and then they don't have any kind of job suitable for them in Afghanistan, and then they are living for Pakistan or Iran or European states. And Purnima, right? You asked me about my source, the Taliban controlled area. The source I am quoting here is SIGAR source, SIGAR. I cannot remember the full form. That according to the SIGAR report 2019, more than 52% of Afghan region is under Taliban control. It's a 2019 report, 52%. And then I think 2020, the second quarterly report, it says nearly 67% of Afghan regions, Afghan provinces are under Taliban control. And could you please repeat the food security question? I didn't get it.
No, actually, I was commenting on that you were saying that there is the government is not can't handle the food security problem. So that's what I'm saying. Due to the growing insecurity in the country, it is depending mostly on the humanitarian assistance to tackle the food issues. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So, any more questions? And I think Bhaswati, are we done for the day?
I think that's it.
So once again, thank you all.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. And thank you all the participants for your wonderful presentation. Now over to Bhaswati ma'am.
Yeah, I just have to thank you all for being there till the end of the session. I can see still 31 participants. That's good enough. And we begin sharp at 10. And if we begin at 10, as we see, we have kept time very well. And I'm sure that this is going to be the trend now. So see you all tomorrow. And Amrish, thank you so much for being here. And I think Arnav's glitch was actually the real thing, in the sense that it made us feel that this is really a webinar and an e-conference, and we are meeting digitally. So that was also a part of that whole thing. So once again, thank you, everyone. See you all tomorrow sharp at 10. Bye-bye.
Thank you.